You're holding a small glass bottle. Inside, the water glows faintly, even in a dimly lit room. In the 1920s, this bottle was advertised as, quote, "the greatest therapeutic force known to mankind." A wealthy man drank it 3 times a day for 5 years. His name was Eben Byers, national amateur golf champion, Yale graduate, millionaire industrialist. Within 5 years, his jaw began to disintegrate, literally, piece by piece. Here's the part that should genuinely stop you. Doctors were recommending this medicine to their patients, and it wasn't hidden or illegal or sold in some back alley. It was marketed, openly, proudly, as a miracle cure. So what exactly was in that bottle? And how did an entire country convince itself that drinking it was a good idea? Rewind to 1898. Marie and Pierre Curie had just discovered a new element, one that glowed faintly in the dark, gave off constant warmth, and seemed to defy the normal rules of matter entirely. They called it radium. Almost overnight, radium became one of the most famous substances on Earth. Newspapers described it in almost mystical terms, a source of endless energy, a symbol of modern science's power to unlock nature's deepest secrets. Early researchers, including the Curies themselves, hadn't yet fully understood the dangers of prolonged radiation exposure. Marie Curie herself would eventually die from complications linked to decades of exposure. But at the turn of the century, that risk simply wasn't part of the public conversation yet. What was part of the conversation was radium's apparent glow, its warmth, its strange, almost magical energy. And to a public hungry for the next great scientific miracle, that was more than enough. Entrepreneurs noticed the opportunity almost immediately. If radium seemed to represent limitless energy, why not bottle that energy and sell it directly to the public? And it wasn't just tonics. Radium found its way into an astonishing range of everyday products throughout the early 1900s. Toothpaste, face cream, even chocolate, all marketed with radium as the star ingredient, the thing that made them modern, scientific, superior. For a brief period, the word radioactive wasn't a warning label, it was a selling point. Enter William J. A. Bailey, a Harvard dropout with no medical degree, no scientific credentials of any real substance. None of that stopped him from presenting himself, quite convincingly, as a doctor of medicine. In 1918, Bailey introduced a product called Radithor, distilled water containing measured amounts of radium and a related radioactive substance called mesothorium. The marketing was extraordinary. Radithor was advertised as a cure for over 150 different conditions: fatigue, high blood pressure, digestive problems, and, notably, sexual impotence, a claim that would prove particularly relevant to buyers. Bailey also understood something crucial about how to actually sell a fake medicine. He offered physicians a kickback, somewhere around 16 to 17%, for every bottle they prescribed to a patient. Think about what that means for a second. The people patients trusted most, their own doctors, had a direct financial incentive to recommend this product, regardless of whether it actually worked. Over 400,000 bottles of Radithor were sold between 1925 and 1930 alone. Bailey wasn't operating in some obscure corner of the medical world either. He advertised in respected publications, positioned Radithor as a serious pharmaceutical product, and cultivated an image of scientific legitimacy that most consumers, and apparently many doctors, had no real way of independently verifying. This is the dark origin, and if you like uncovering the real, often disturbing stories behind everyday history, hit subscribe now. Drop a comment telling us what forgotten object or scandal you want us to dig into next, and we'll go find the real story. In 1927, Eben Byers, 51 years old, wealthy, athletic, and by every account genuinely healthy, fell from a private railway sleeping berth and injured his arm. The pain lingered. His physician, looking for a solution, suggested he try Radithor. Byers had no reason to question the advice. His doctor was recommending it. The product's marketing was confident, scientific-sounding, thoroughly modern. So Byers began drinking it. And he loved it. He reported feeling more energetic, more vigorous. He was so impressed, in fact, that he started sending cases of Radithor to his friends as gifts. Over the next 5 years, Byers consumed more than 1,400 bottles. Each bottle contained roughly 2 microcuries of radium. To put that in perspective, 10 micrograms of radium in the human body is considered a fatal dose. Byers was drinking, essentially, a slow, carefully bottled poison, marketed to him as vitality itself. What makes his case especially striking is how genuinely healthy he was before all of this began. He wasn't a sick man desperately searching for a last resort cure. He was an accomplished athlete in the prime of his adult life, drinking Radithor purely to feel even better than he already did. Here's the part of the story that explains everything that came next. Radium is chemically similar to calcium, which means the human body, unable to tell the difference, treats radium exactly the way it treats calcium. It absorbs it directly into bone tissue. Once radium settles into bone, it stays there. It doesn't pass through the body and leave. It continues emitting radiation continuously from the inside for years, sometimes for the rest of a person's life. Bone tissue exposed to sustained internal radiation begins to break down. It weakens. It becomes porous, brittle, and in severe cases, it simply starts to die. For Byers, that process began quietly and invisibly, almost immediately. He just had no way of knowing it yet. There's something particularly cruel about how radium poisoning actually progresses. It doesn't announce itself. There's no immediate pain, no obvious symptom in the early months or even years. The damage accumulates silently in the one part of the body designed to last a lifetime. By around 1930, roughly a year and a half before his death, Byers began experiencing severe headaches and pain in his jaw. A New York radiologist, Dr. Joseph Steiner, who had previously treated factory workers poisoned by radium paint in an entirely separate scandal, recognized the symptoms almost immediately. Byers was suffering from radium poisoning. By the time federal investigators visited Byers at his Southampton estate, his condition had become almost impossible to describe. His jaw had deteriorated so severely that most of it had to be surgically removed. Holes had opened in his skull. He could barely speak. One investigator later described the scene bluntly. A more gruesome experience in a more magnificent setting would be difficult to imagine. An autopsy conducted after his death found that Byers had only 6 teeth remaining. Both jaws were, in the investigator's own words, rotted through. His brain had developed abscesses. Doctors calculated that his skeleton contained approximately 36 micrograms of radium, more than 3 times the fatal threshold. Eben Byers died on March 31, 1932, at the age of 51. Byers wasn't some anonymous factory worker whose suffering could quietly disappear from public record the way so many industrial poisoning cases before him had. He was wealthy, famous, a recognizable name in American society. And that fact alone meant his death received a level of press attention that changed the entire national conversation around radioactive medicine almost overnight. A Wall Street Journal headline covering the story became, in its own grim way, iconic. The radium water worked fine until his jaw came off. The Federal Trade Commission, which had already been investigating Radithor's medical claims before Byers' death, used his case as central evidence in shutting the product down entirely. Bailey was ordered to cease making any claims that Radithor was safe or effective. Bailey himself was never criminally prosecuted. He reportedly claimed, later in life, that it was the Great Depression, not the FTC, that ultimately ended his business, not the fact that his product had slowly killed one of his own devoted customers. It's worth noting that Byers wasn't even Bailey's first connection to radium-related tragedy. Years earlier, factory workers, mostly young women, had been poisoned while hand-painting radium onto watch dials, a scandal that had already begun raising public awareness of radium's dangers before Byers's case made headlines. Bailey's own defense of Radithor's safety came, in other words, at a moment when the warning signs were already becoming difficult for anyone paying attention to ignore. Because of the ongoing radiation risk his remains posed, Byers's body was buried in a lead-lined coffin. In 1965, more than 3 decades after his death, researchers exhumed his remains specifically to study the long-term effects of radium poisoning on human bone. His body was still measurably radioactive. Byers's death, along with the earlier related scandal involving factory workers poisoned by radium-based paint, helped permanently end what historians now call the radium fad, and push the United States toward significantly stronger regulation of both radioactive materials and the broader patent medicine industry. The FDA's regulatory powers over medical claims, powers that still shape what companies are legally allowed to say about their products today, were substantially strengthened in the years following his very public, very gruesome death. It's worth pausing on just how directly Byers's case fed into that legal shift. Prior to his death, patent medicine manufacturers operated in a regulatory environment that was, by modern standards, almost shockingly loose. Companies could make sweeping health claims with minimal scientific evidence, and enforcement action typically required proving deliberate fraud, a genuinely difficult legal bar to clear. The Federal Trade Commission's case against Bailey, bolstered enormously by the graphic, undeniable reality of what had happened to Byers's body, helped establish a much stronger precedent, that a product's safety claims could be challenged based on demonstrated physical harm, not just provable intent to deceive. The broader radium fad didn't disappear instantly either. Radium-based cosmetics and tonics lingered in some markets for a few more years, gradually fading as public trust in radioactive miracle products collapsed alongside Radithor's reputation. But Byers's death is widely regarded by historians as the single most consequential moment in ending the era of casual, unregulated radioactive self-medication in America. Picture that small, glowing bottle again, the one you started with. It's worth remembering that nobody involved in Eben Byers' death saw themselves as a villain. His doctor believed he was helping a patient. Byers believed he was investing in his own health. Even Bailey, for all his fraudulent claims, was selling something he insisted, right up until the end, that he genuinely believed in. Nobody set out to dissolve a man's jaw. They set out to sell energy, vitality, modern science in a bottle. The tragedy came from an entire chain of people, doctors, marketers, and eventually a patient himself, trusting a shiny new scientific discovery slightly more than they questioned it. Maybe that's worth remembering the next time something gets marketed to you as effortless, modern, and miraculous. Sometimes the glow in the bottle really is exactly what it looks like, and sometimes it's something your own body has absolutely no way of telling apart from poison, until it's already far too late to matter. Radithor itself is long gone, its remaining bottles now sitting in museum cases rather than medicine cabinets, studied as artifacts of a genuinely strange chapter in medical history, rather than sold as anything resembling a cure. But the pattern Byers lived through and died from, a confident new technology, a trusted authority figure recommending it, and a public eager to believe in an easy answer, hasn't disappeared along with the bottle. It just keeps finding new forms to wear.